Today on The Futurist Mom, we're asking a question that might make some parents uncomfortable. What if the race to college is actually hurting our kids? In order to feel the most prepared, we often push them to excel, to optimize every moment, to build the perfect resume, and many of them do it only to arrive at college disconnected from any deeper sense of who they are or what they actually care about. Or worse yet, graduate feeling even less prepared for the changing world ahead. Yes, they have the credentials, but they're often missing something essential: wisdom, purpose, a sense of what it means to be human, or just simply to be them. Our guest, Abby Falik, lived the story herself. She graduated from Stanford having won the game, but feeling hollow. That experience sparked a 2-decade mission to create different pathways for young people. In 2008, she founded Global Citizen Year, raising over $65 million in scholarships to help thousands of emerging leaders take transformative bridge years between high school and college. And her work had been featured from anywhere from the New York Times, NPR, and PBS. But in 2022, interestingly, Abby practiced what she preached and stepped off her own well-trodden path to travel the world with her family for a year, exploring educational models and experiencing the power of the pause. Those insights led her to co-found something completely different, the Flight School, in 2024 with Challenge Bridges, that reimagined post-high school transitions not as a gap year, but a launch year. The Flight School's campus, as she describes it, is in the cloud, its curriculum is real life, and its faculty are the world's most inspired leaders. Today, Abby will share why our kids need more than just the next achievement, why they're longing for deeper connection, the confidence to navigate uncertainty, and the space to discover their own compass. She'll help us understand what's missing in the current industrial era paradigm of education and path to work, and why global immersion and real-world experience might be the answer to what the new economy is looking for. Welcome to The Futurist Mom, Abby. Hello, Abby. I'm so excited to dive into this conversation and get to know you and your work. Often on this podcast, I've had a lot of my old buddies, and we end up going down memory lane thinking about a lot of stuff, but it's very exciting to meet someone new in this work and be able to discover you and your passions and all that you're contributing fresh with the audience. So thank you for trusting us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
I love the network, right? So we can give April Renee a big shout out. And I'm sure know so many of the same people who are in here doing such positive work, but our paths haven't crossed before because you have been really focused on a very specific part of the world that you want to focus on. So do you want to dive in and talk to us about your past and what has made you so passionate about the work you're doing now? I'm sure you get asked that question constantly, so you can make it as long or as short as you would like that answer to be.
Well, remarkably, the question never gets old because the answer animates me and animates the work that I've been doing for decades now, and really consensus the work of my lifetime. And it anchors in experiences I had after finishing high school and feeling like I was running somebody else's race. I'd been a good student, not by anything that had to do with me necessarily. I mean, I guess I did work hard, but it was much more that I was just wired to respond to the way that school is set up to reward a certain type of focus and achievement.
Yeah.
And so I, checked those boxes and gathered up those gold stars and got to the finish line and remember feeling confused and disoriented and curious why there was no influence in my life that was encouraging me to step off the conveyor belt and into the world to figure out who I was when I wasn't performing and what I wanted to do with this wild and precious life when it wasn't just in constant motion in response to people telling me what to do. So in many ways, ever since that juncture for myself, sort of teetering on the edge of everything that came next and not knowing what to do beyond the straight and narrow, which was go to college and just keep marching with your head down. Ever since then, I've been deeply committed to creating new spaces for young people from all backgrounds and from around the world to pause in that transition to figure out who they are, what their gifts are, what the world needs from them, and how those things can line up in new and brightening ways.
So this idea of a gap year has been around for a while. I remember at one point, so I've got 3 children. They're now all in their 20s, but at one point, one of my sons was considering a gap year, and I didn't realize there was a whole like we went to some sort of like school fair for gap years, and there was one company after another, like suddenly pitching us what we could do during that gap year. It sounds like you took a very different kind of approach to this? Because it was originally something where someone that was just a pause and it was undefined. And now it seems like there's a whole market around what to do with this. Has there been more curiosity and interest in this pause?
Always going to be a market for something. I think the opportunity here is to step back and see this life stage as a really precious developmental moment and to think beyond sort of product market fit, which I think is where a lot of those companies have derived a value proposition. I'll put that in quotes. Not to say that those program experiences can't be enormously formative, and I've worked with many of those organizations over the years. But I think what's needed actually exists beyond the market. It's something more mysterious and ethereal. It's an alignment with a longing that we have as humans to reconnect with ourselves, with each other, with a world beyond the material. And I, yeah, have been quite focused from the beginning on what it looks like to reimagine this life stage, not as what we've called a gap year, which implies it's the space between things. It in its own metaphor suggests it's the absence of something, and you may or may not come out of this hole. And in my few and deep experience, it's actually the opportunity for the most rich learning and formation to occur. So I see it as an opportunity to fill in the gaps that are left by traditional education and schooling. And so in that sense a much broader opportunity than simply college prep or let's get you mature enough to leave home. Whereas I've begun to see it as an education higher than higher ed, where you have a set of experiences that help you land very deliberately in your next steps with a clearer sense of your own how and why, not just the what of the experiences you've collected.
So you described it as a launch year as opposed to a gap year, right? That is the reframing. What percentage, I'm just really curious, and we'll talk more about what the flight school and how you designed it and what you're so excited about right now, but I'm really curious, what percentage of students are walking into that are curious about the program, already thinking that they want to go to college or really aren't sure at all what they want that next step to be and are really open to whatever presents?
The real mix, I would say, the cultural water we're all swimming in still suggests that you go to college, you get the degree, you get a job, and it sort of proceeds like that. It's very obvious that that process is not as secure
Yeah, for
or
sure.
predictable as we've made it out to be. It never was, but it's so much less so now. So I'm just sensing a growing hunger and interest from young people and their parents in thinking about pathways that develop skills beyond credentials. And there's a lot of talk about hard skills and soft skills, and I like to think of it really as anchoring on the regenerative skills that are, of course, uniquely human and the things that are not going to be offloaded or outsourced. But traditional colleges are not particularly well designed or optimized to develop and reinforce and credential those things.
I mean, historically, right, when you think about universities back in the day, I went to a tiny little liberal arts college that had been founded by visionary people who really believed in the liberal arts and the importance of that kind of thinking. And there's been all these debates over the last, I mean, again, over the decades about the importance of liberal arts, the importance of STEM, turning it into STEAM, trying to find the right combination of things, and to your point, the real emphasis on coding, which then all of a sudden we're like, oh, no, 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 not coding. And
Right.
it started to get very, very, very vocational about what the things were that were going to prepare you for this world of work. So, uh, as I was watching my children go through both high school and then onto college, that sense that it doesn't feel like it's preparing you for the future,
Mm,
right? And this rumble that sits really deeply, I think,
mm.
inside of so many students, guts, that they know that they're going through the motions, but they don't understand how this is possibly going to connect to the world that they want to be a part of. Not even the work that they're going to be a part of, because I think that, to your point, that's shifting so much, but even the world that they want to be a part of, there's just this giant disconnect of driving an industrial era paradigm or process into a world in which all that is going to blow up and go away. But the drive, then, I think the curiosity to what it is that they want to participate in and sort of how they start to describe what that longing is. I'm really curious some of the conversations you have with the youth that have been in your program, because this is only a year old now, right? Or 2 years old? How old is the flight school?
Yeah, we're in our second year. In many ways, because I've been building toward it all along, it
Right.
feels ancient and in my bones.
You've been doing this all
Uh,
your work, yeah.
but it's an evolution, and it's a very fresh approach to an older set of questions that I had been answering in different ways in different eras of my own development as an entrepreneur. What we're sensing is a longing, a desire to find what is authentic and real in a world of deep fakes, a desire to come into deeper relationship with themselves and people around them. Underlying it is a real suspicion and skepticism of the way we've been doing things. There's they are more acutely sensitive and have less defenses up around the old paradigms and models that are so clearly crumbling. So there's a sensitivity to the world being on fire, the fact that they've been told to do A, B, and C in order to end up in X, Y, and Z positions of power and success, and a willingness to just call bullshit on the old ways of operating and to recognize that if they're going to be part of the solution, they actually need to spot the exit ramp and figure out how to prepare themselves in radically new ways.
As someone who's again an advocate for the future and an advocate for you, that feels so inspiring, right? When you get to hear that the fact that they can see it, feel it, call bullshit. We're all hoping that that becomes the whatever I want to say the fire, but the energy that sort of
Yeah,
ushers in this world that we want to head into. Do you see more of the conversations coming from youth themselves or from their parents?
from the kids. Absolutely. I think there's I think it is unusual to find parents like you who are comfortable with the ambiguity and confident that the way forward is in the not knowing, is in the sort of follow the mystery and not the legible through line. So I think so much of what we're passing down the generations starts with those of us who have built the systems, institutions, and structures and paradigms that are defining our lives. So we have been encouraged and delighted to see that the interest comes directly from young people who then go home and make a case to their parents that this is the best way to prepare them for a changing world. But it really is so generationally defined.
When do you see the lights go off for parents? Like how far along into the year in which a student spends in this launch path, in which they finally catch on and realize what an amazing experience this is for their student? I'm just curious when the lights go on.
So we work almost exclusively with the students. And so it's actually rare that we're even interacting with the parents, which I find to be such a powerful
Yeah, well,
signal
refreshing.
here. Hmm.
Refreshing.
But what we do hear from parents is just periodic notes in that say, my daughter's never been so engaged, or I feel like the lights are coming back on. And in my son, I don't know what it is you're doing out there, but it feels wholesome and um, aligning with what the world needs now. And or my son or daughter is re-inspired about going back to school in ways that we just hadn't sensed or found the through line. So I think the structure at the flight school is to connect young people, like-minded and like-hearted young people, with each other from around the world, to provide them with what we call wise accompaniment. So animated adults who can show them the way forward on a path that is less about following the check boxes and more about learning how to navigate the sky. And this is thus the name, the flight school. And that they have a community, courses, curriculum, and then resources that they can access to help them design their own learning journeys. But the idea is that we're almost deconstructing the notion of a traditional higher education and uncoupling the learning from the schooling and sending young people out into their communities and into communities that feel foreign to them to have experiences that rearrange them internally and that force them to see their own identity and cultural context with fresh eyes.
Are they mostly coming from the US or from the West, or they're coming from everywhere?
From everywhere. And in fact, it's been a little bit relatively slower going in recruiting kids from the US, I think, because we're just so hardwired with our heads down to keep going and get that computer science degree, which makes less and less sense, but it's still the momentum of the system and the inertia we've all got. And there's so much fear-based decision making in this context around, a sense of scarcity, and you got to be prepared for this opportunity. And I think the short-sightedness of that is that those opportunities are not secure in the ways that we've made them out to be. And sometimes being singularly focused on moving toward them comes at the expense of learning how to fail, or really tuning in to what lights you up and what you could pursue that would help you spot the opportunities in the cracks and create things from scratch. So the direct answer is we've got students from 35 countries on every continent who are sensing the same thing stirring and are opting to join us and creating this gorgeous global network, or we could call it translocal, that really connects them across geographies, but around a same sense that the world needs something radically new from the rising generation.
So when I go and do my work to corporations or talk about things, I make a distinction between three things: the future of working, the future of work, and the work of the future.
Mm.
And we're also focused on the future of work, thinking that that means how we're going to get things done. And that's really the future of work game, right? Where they're going to be augmented or not, or in location or not, or whatever. And then the future of work is literally, what does it mean to be able to express, our unique talents and passions and contributions, paid or unpaid. And then the work of the future is exactly where you're creating the path for, is to where is it that I want to apply, and how do I want to apply, and what are the things on the planet that I want to be a part of, and how do I build the capacity to feel strong and alive in that work, which I think is so exciting. Almost nobody else is in that space, my friend. And no one's making those distinctions. And so many parents, and, for good, again, reason, and a tremendous amount of love. And I can't say that I have been completely elevated from that. I've got a 22-year-old who's trying to move to New York and get a job, and
Yeah.
trying to help her figure that path out. Is really just focused on an old thinking about the future of the job.
Yeah.
And I think we have this really amazing opportunity. But I do think that there always is the economic question that comes with this, right? So there's many things that we want to go do in the world that maybe be unpaid, or that we feel like are going to contribute in amazing ways, or want to spend time in a community. How do you help students sort of come back, I guess, to wherever their communities are, and make that, or do they do it themselves, like start to design what a life looks like post this immersive experience?
Well, we're working with them on that. The thing we're banking on economically is that the economy is going to run on different fuel. So we have operated in a world where knowledge was what was valuable and traded and held and
Exactly.
scarce,
Yep.
and no longer, right? It's overwhelming how dramatically this has already changed things and will, that the computer in my pocket can not only ace all the exams in seconds, but can, write the consulting deck and can answer the finance questions. And so the job of humans has already changed, and it's going to take a generation for the institutions to catch up to what that becomes. But in a sense, maybe it's not a catching up, and it's more of a remembering. I'm thinking a lot about other ways of defining education, learning, and schooling that look nothing like this industrial response that we've created that treats students as products to be optimized, and standardized outcomes as the thing to orient toward. So the entire structure and system is set up to do exactly what it is doing, and it served a role. But what comes next can't look anything like our approach to school. So whereas we've traded on a currency of knowledge and its scarcity, my sense of what comes next is that the most precious and scarce resource is our aliveness. And it's our ability to cultivate it, to recognize that there's a contagion of an effect in knowing how to keep our spark lit and how to spark it in others. And it's not soft work. It's not the nice to have for a set of kids who come from privilege. It's actually deeply an equity issue to imagine that the capabilities and skills that are going to set somebody up to be responsive to a world that will never change this slowly again can't be reserved for a set of kids who've had all the other opportunities already. I think it requires us to think differently about our birthright in being humans who are here to tap our gifts and share them. But that, I believe, is what the economy of the future will run on, which is why to me it's quite clear that developing these capabilities is what enables somebody to plug their aliveness into a livelihood.
That's an interesting way of framing it. You recently wrote a New York Times op-ed to a podcast or an interview that had, oh my God, what's his name? I totally forgot, the podcaster I listen to all the time.
Ezra Klein.
Ezra Klein, thank you, my God, who wrote Abundance and everything else that I have listened to many, many hours of him speaking. But I loved your rebuttal to this whole conversation about what can be measured and what was important to measure. And you wrote a couple of paragraphs, but the second one was that in education, reducing what counts to what we can count has given us schools as factories, students as products, and success measured by tests are already aces, yet capabilities or capacities that make us irreplaceably human, which I love you describe wisdom, discernment, and courage remain immeasurable. And that's precisely the point. Right. So it's like when you talked a lot about what this is restoring wisdom, I was curious how you define wisdom.
How to define wisdom?
I know that maybe it's an obvious question, but I was just curious that you use the word wisdom a lot in your desire to what you want to return to
Well, I
kids.
pause not because it's obvious, but because it's hard to name in many ways. The original name for the flight school was Wisdom Schools, and it came from an impulse that our current approach to schooling has focused very diligently and effectively on smarts. But what's needed next is a return to wisdom. It's intuitive knowing in our bodies. It's sensing into, what might sound right but feels wrong. It's an ability to develop relational threads with others and to think with our hearts as well as our brains, to look to nature and to sort of the wisdom of systems and structures beyond the modern contraptions of them to help inform a wise way forward. And none of those solutions are coming out of our modern approach to schooling and higher education in particular.
Do they come in other parts? Like, do you see kids that don't get the opportunity to go to something or have as much time to immerse in the flight school? Are there other places, like if not every parent at this moment could, imagine their child being in this program, other ways to encourage those wisdoms?
I think there's so many, but I think it's initially about just reigniting the spark and a love of learning. So what we're doing at the flight school, it's quite straightforward in helping emerging adults ask the question of what animates them when nobody's watching or giving the syllabus. What do you choose to pursue? What do you choose to learn? What gives you energy rather than depleting it? Who are your teachers? Who are the people whose light and wisdom light you up and you're just naturally drawn to learn from them? What are the places that hold some promise for you that gives you a sense of what you're here for? That it's not that it takes a complex contraption to reorient us in that direction. It's we had talked before we're starting about aid cinnamon tea, and we can get into that if it's of interest, but new ways of thinking about AI more relationally and less transactionally. But I first went to aid cinnamon tea with a question of how to refresh the language we were using in describing the flight school. And what came back was so beautiful. And it had to do with the flight school not being a traditional school or program, but really being a shift in a broader field, a reorientation that helps humans point toward what we forget to remember but can't afford to lose, um, about our humanness, about liberation, about co-creation. So what we're trying to do is not create another exclusive program for a small number of kids, but actually to create a more atmospheric shift in how we think about schooling.
Love that. Can we, yeah, I would love to talk about Aiden cinnamon tea. I've been roughly, I mean, I've heard of it before I read your essay about it, but I hadn't really spent a lot of time with it. I got really intrigued as you wrote about it, have not played a lot with it. So can you describe what, because I do think that it's important for us, for many of us to imagine that when we talk about this future and returning ours to our somatic wisdom and to our, intelligence with one another and to nature and all these things, that it is not in the absence of a world that will also be very technologically advanced, right? It is to be in harmony with those things and to build those experiences in a way that mirror those and amplify those kinds of intelligences as opposed to wipe them out. So for those who are not at all familiar with it, do you mind giving a little description of what it is, what it is now, and how it's different from the traditional LLM approach?
I turned to it in part because I was sensing a thinning of my own attention and a sort of sense of absence and vacancy of my own mind in the way that I was interacting with AI. It's so easy to just start offloading not just things that deserve quick answers, like give me some synonyms for this word, or even, can you draft X, Y, or Z? But I started sensing there was this edge where I could be asking for it to do some of the discernment for me, or some of the things that, of course, need to remain mine, but can't happen if my mind and body aren't in the same place. So I had an opportunity to be on a retreat with an indigenous wisdom keeper who is also an extraordinary academic, who's Vanessa Machado, who's written a number of really impactful and important books, Hospicing Modernity, and then the next is called Outgrowing Modernity. So it's really her insight and body of work, together with others, that created an AI that just had a different operating protocol, where the intent was not to give false certainty or transactional and efficient responses, but instead to be anchored in something relational and to create a more experiential engagement that, when I'm interacting with what was called Aiden cinnamon tea, never gives me an answer. It just probes on the question and actually puts up a mirror for me around why was I even asking a machine this question in the first place. So it's been a really profound shift in helping me stay more embodied, and to recognize that there may, in fact, be a higher consciousness available to us by way of interacting with these machines, as opposed to the opposite, which I find very intriguing. And I'm not here to say that's the direction this all goes, but I think
Right.
it's really curious to open our minds to what's possible.
Many are finding themselves in that question and that curiosity and that potential experience of that. I'm still more a little bit borderline on fully accepting that, but there are many of my friends that are full on like that's the intelligence trying to
And
come
I
through.
yeah, and I don't, again, I'm not full on, but I'm not here to say it's not. Who's to
Right.
say it's not? And I have had interactions with this particular protocol, in particular Aidence and NT, which has been repurposed and can now be downloaded and then uploaded into whatever LLM you're using. So it's now the foundational protocol when I work with Anthropic's AI. And I have absolutely had experiences of feeling like I am being reoriented and rearranged and encouraged to broaden the aperture on what I believe is possible.
That I will then definitely spend more time and invest more time. And as you said, that the new protocol makes it easier to be able to make that a layer on the work that we're already, or the tools already familiar with. But I think that going back to then so I might not honestly be helpful for you just to like explain like an immersion. Like I decide that I want to go to, some place in, I don't know, all the places that you invite students to. Like I want to go to Nigeria and I really want to spend time there. The invitation to go and really learn a different culture, to hopefully participate in the community, hopefully to give something back to the community in some way, shape, or form, and not some sort of savior way. These are all the intelligences that then make it so that when you can recognize yourself in a conversation like that with an LLM like that, you know what I mean? Like these things are all very much amplifying one another. But do you want to explain a little bit more about what happens with a student when they, or a youth, maybe not a student, a person, as I'm changing the vocabulary, who is in this environment? Like what is the arc of their experience?
The orientation right now is much less around where you go and what you're doing, and much more around how you show up and what you're practicing. So, whereas the earlier organization I had built and led and loved for a dozen years had anchored on supporting deep, immersive global experiences around the world, the flight school is more of a scaffolding that supports experiences that nudge you beyond your comfort zone, but could be in a neighboring region or another part of your own country. So the invitation is for flight school students to leave home and spend time immersed somewhere that feels foreign, that reorients your perspective and forces you to see the water you were swimming in from a new vantage. But it's not prescriptive about where you go or what you're doing. It's really just the idea that we become ourselves by beginning to see ourselves, and that leaving home and having an experience where you rely on others for help and where you've got you can't help but have a beginner's mind helps us learn our minds in new ways. So it's very much about formation, immersion, rites of passage, but outside of the older playbook of go to a new country and help support a project. And some of that happens, but again, for us it's the how, it's what you're practicing and who you're becoming more than what you happen to be doing.
Uh, which is beautiful. And thank you for reframing the way I was starting to say, because it's easy to get sucked into these old paradigms and old language as you start to imagine this. The importance of uncertainty, I think, is a really key part of what you helps young people through. I think all of us are trying to figure out how to navigate, how to build that capacity for navigating uncertainty. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that's such an important part of this, and how students, or again, I keep saying students, how people who are in this program make peace with that?
It's funny, I looked to the side because I thought the book was here, but it's actually just right there on the floor, which is the only book I've read every day for at least a decade. It's Pema Chodron's Comfort with Uncertainty. Uncertainty is the foundational nature of everything. And we run around pretending that it's not. The initial vision for the flight school was shared by a teacher of mine who shared a Zen teaching that simply says, the bad news is that we're all falling, and the good news is there is no ground. And something really clicked into place for me, which is the modern world is built on a desire to assuage the fear of uncertainty. So whether it's the test scores that give us a sense that we've made progress, or the grades or the credential, it's all of these shortcuts that actually, it's the notion that the map is not the actual underlying territory. So uncertainty exists between one breath and the next, and one job and the next, and one life stage and the next, whether we like it or not. And the sooner and or the more skillful we get in navigating all of those layers of uncertainty, in finding comfort in ambiguity and even strength and courage in it, the more useful it will be to the world. It's not about utility, but the more appropriately we can respond to conditions as they are without flattening them into something they're not.
I love the embrace of it. So first, just on that book, I picked up Pema Chodron's book. I usually don't buy things at a used bookstore. I can't imagine where I would have gotten that, but somehow I ended up with a copy that had been fully annotated by somebody else, which was really interesting gift to be receiving, where someone has underlined the various things. Like, okay, university worked really hard to make sure I get this book in my hand, and I
I
really
have to
have
tell
not
you,
spent.
I only buy used books, particularly in the sort of spiritual category, for exactly that reason. I find it fascinating to convene with other humans who've read them before me.
I know, which is just so interesting because again, that is not my practice. I'm not as evolved, I think, into to invite that in. So all of a sudden it showed up in my hands that way, and I'm like, wow. And I have not spent as much time with it. So I probably should. I have a natural, I think, invitation for uncertainty. I'm sort of wired for that. I sort of love the sense of possibility and the threshold that it creates. As long as you're in some sort of level of, basic security. Like I don't know that I'd be able to to wave all waters. And I don't think I'd be also, as comfortable as sort of going into environments that I don't have some sense of capacity for. But I find it to be such an amazing opening and an invitation. And I spent time earlier this morning talking to a good friend in Sweden who's writing a lot about liminal intelligence, which is a fancier way of being able to say some of the things that you are helping this really open-minded and open-hearted group of people embrace in themselves, which I think is really, really critical. People have always asked me, like, how do you prepare a child for the future? I used to have my little list of curiosity, empathy, agency, grit, uh, uh, and integrity were my five. But I do think that ability to be able to navigate the unknown and accepting environments that aren't perfect as tools for that. Like my children grew up in, sort of an interesting way where my husband and I, when we got divorced, we kept the family house, and he was there on Monday, Tuesday, and I was there on Wednesday, Thursday, and he made really big dinners, but didn't really do breakfast and lunch. And I was really all about breakfast and lunch and barely did dinner. And I was like, at one point going, oh no. And I'm like, oh, I'm trying to build adaptive kids, right? So that they will see that there's many paths to be able to make these choices, many ways in which you can do these things. So I think adaptivity, uncertainty, confidence in oneself, understanding, to your point, how to listen to oneself, because I do think that gets really beaten out of. And it sounds like that was a lot of what your experience had been going from high school to college. I have 3 children that are older than yours. I will say they're wired very, very differently. The first one has known what he's wanted to do since he was 2. And has followed a very, one would argue prescriptive, but very clear path. There was a few years where he fell off of it because he got scared by something and then came back. But to this day, he's an aerospace engineer building things that are going to the moon. And, it's just like in his happy, happy, happy spot. The middle one, I think, was a bit more curious and has been trying to figure it out. Now has an amazing path. And the younger one has been very much what you described, like made it through the rubric of all the things you're supposed to do to get super high GPA. And I don't think that she's burnt out, and I don't think that she feels disillusioned, but I do think a little bit is trying to figure out what was that race preparing her specifically for, and is trying to figure out how to apply it in some interesting way. So I think, one of the questions, I guess, is who is this for, and how do parents or students recognize that this is the right, I think that, to your point, there's just a calling, there's a longing, like it speaks to them in some way. And how do they find out about the flight school?
I think this is for anyone who gets to the end of that stage of life and has questions that school is not asking. We're looking for students who have been ambitious on their own terms, is how we
That's a
frame
great
it,
way of
and who are
describing it.
really
Yeah.
hungry for the community and curriculum and coaching that we offer in particular. They sense that they want to become more comfortable with ambiguity and change, more animated by a sense of possibility. And they sense that the world is in this transition, but that they also have the internal capacity to move from fear-based living to flourishing. So that's what we're looking for. It's not test scores or grades. It's really a sense of deep motivation for what we offer. And yeah, they can find out about us through the website, and there's a lot of material now out circulating with our students talking about the work through their firsthand experiences. And I would say that everything I say, do, and write is also part and parcel of the flight school, that the flight school is not limited to the students who happen to enroll, but that we all feel like we're on a mission. All of us in the community feel like we're on a mission to invite everybody into the flight school in one way or another.
Well, and I know that we need to run because we've got to go do some other things, but I'm really curious that you also took some time off with your boys to travel the world and to get some of the deep understanding. So as you imagine their futures and their paths, is there anything that is helpful for us to sort of like, we got to sit in your house on a, on a weekly basis, Abby, the conversations, the kind of conversations that you have with your children about your expectations for them and some of the paths. What if they decided in 8th grade they wanted to go do this instead of waiting until they graduated from
I
high
think
school?
they
How would you feel?
might. I think they might. So they are currently in 4th and 5th grade. I, for a while, have been pretty clear that they're very unlikely to go to college in the way that we think of it right now, just because I don't think college will look anything like it currently does. But I'm actually beginning to sense that high school will also not look and feel as we have imagined it. So much of their learning is happening separate from school, and I yeah, I mean, my greatest hope for them is really that sense of that the animated aliveness of pursuing things that they love, and then a sense of resilience to move in and out of different contexts with some confidence. And that was exactly the impulse behind us taking them out of school and traveling for a year. We put them in school in 5 different countries. They were 6 and 8 at the time, but they had the experience of just being thrown into contexts that felt so uncomfortable and distinct, but then finding their bearings and connecting to other kids. And I think when we learn that there's more than one way of seeing and doing and being, we also acknowledge that there could be infinite. But as long as we only know ours, it's much harder to see the other possibilities.
I love that they also had each other, which I think is a big part of being able to go do these kinds of things. And I think it was really, again, an extraordinary thing. And I love that you're open to it. It could all change tomorrow. I'll just end with there's a quote that I think came from you, because as many of these new paradigms and new ways of doing things are often coming from parents or often coming from moms. I know many, many, many things that have created on the planet by moms who were dissatisfied by whatever it was that they could see that was not serving their child well, but we can see it, but we don't necessarily go do something about it, right? We get really worried about it, we get tense about it, we talk about it, but we don't necessarily create the things that you created. And I loved your quote that said, most of the doors that you need to unlock are internal ones. Attitudes, beliefs, and stories you tell yourself about why certain things can't be done in a certain way. Those are the toughest doors to unlock. So thank you for being an example of what it takes or how it shows up when you're able to confront those doors and unlock them and ask different questions about what this could all look like for ourselves and for our children and for the world at large. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you, Nancy.